Hello, everyone, and welcome to the makeup lecture for critical thinking through English composition. This is the makeup class for March the 28th, 2024. It's the long Easter weekend, and I hope you're doing well. Today, I'm going to do two things. First, I'd like to do a quick review of all that we covered in Unit 2, just to make sure that everyone understands. And then I'm going to go on to Unit 3, looking at arguments using analogies. So, without further ado, get that coffee. And let's begin. Okay. First, I'd like to start off just by reviewing some things that we did in the last week or two, because there did seem to be a little bit of confusion about what sort of things I was expecting from students when discussing arguments using examples for generalizations. I hope this video will clear up any misunderstanding. So I'll just quickly go through here, arguments for examples. So a generalization, as I mentioned before, a generalization is any time we make a broad, sweeping statement about either a small group of people, places, or things, or a large group of people, places, or things. It's impossible to make completely accurate statements about very large groups of people, places, or things. So we often like to make statements that generalize. They may not apply to every single person, place, or thing in a group, but they are good for basic understanding. A big difference between a generalization and a stereotype is that a stereotype does not allow for exceptions. When we talk about stereotypes, whether they're positive or negative, they are often applied as a blanket, meaning covering everyone. Whereas when we make generalizations, we are acknowledging that not everyone may, follow a set list of criteria, but the generalization is good for helping us to understand basic concepts. Generalizations are good for helping us to understand the complicated world that we live in, because generalizations are, by definition, general, and they simplify often complicated phenomenon. Just a quick note, if you are making a generalization about a very small set, for example, your siblings, you would make a statement that applies to all of your siblings. Let's say you have one brother and one sister. You could make a generalization about your brother and sister as long as that statement is broadly applicable to both your brother and your sister. For example, let's say your brother and sister both have blonde hair. You could say my siblings have blonde hair. If you were to make a generalization about your brother and sister and say, my siblings are not good at managing money. Now, if you only have one brother and one sister, that generalization should apply to both. If only your brother is poor at managing money, but your sister is very fiscally responsible, then it wouldn't be a good idea to make that sort of generalization. It would be better to make the statement about specifically your brother. When you deal with large sets of people or very large areas, then it's a lot harder. If you want to make a generalization about everyone in a country, for example, it's very hard to take any large group of people and make a very accurate generalization. And that's where we get to the idea of representative examples. You can't make a statement that is 100% applicable to all the people, but you're trying to make a statement that is broadly applicable to many of them. And by doing that, you'll try and think of, for example, three different examples that will be able to demonstrate different groups in order to try and make it clear. So, just moving on, let's make a generalization. Yeah, women get married at much older ages than they used to. If I wanted to make a generalization about the marriage, the average age of marriage for women, I would be much better off choosing a specific country or a specific region rather than talking globally, because the larger the set of people that you're discussing, the harder it is to make an accurate generalization, and the harder it is to try and think of representative examples. By the way, it's also worth noting that it can be very difficult, if not altogether impossible, to make a completely representative example when you're dealing with large numbers. So it's doing your best to come up with three representative examples, even though it will be impossible to have examples that cover everyone. Okay. I also talked about how if you want to use a single case, that might be good as an illustration. You're just using it to sort of buttress a point rather than use that as the anchor for your generalization. If you wanted to say, for example, that Generation Z is very sheltered and immature and unable to deal with the everyday realities of adult life, you would need to think of three fairly representative examples of different people or different groups, different parts of your generation. You wouldn't just use a single example. We have the video here of the girl who's crying after she's just found her first full-time job. I would not say, aha, you see, therefore Generation Z is unable to deal with the day-to-day realities of adult life. It may be a good illustration if I'm trying to lead to a bigger point, but I wouldn't use it as just the basis of my argument. So if you are going to make a generalization, you want to try and think of three examples that not only support your generalization, but are different enough so that they are representative. Now, when we look at some of these situations that come up later in the lecture, I don't expect students to know the exact numbers or even have the specific examples. What I hope students can do is simply understand what types of examples they should be looking for. If you want to make a generalization, what sort of criteria should you have for each example? So in this generalization, women in earlier times were married very young. The person making this generalization gives three examples. We have Juliet from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. So a fictional character, yes, but one that is not out of place in its time. People watching Romeo and Juliet in a theater in Renaissance England probably wouldn't have thought it very strange that such a young girl was getting married. So she is used as an example for English society. A fictional character, but one that is in place with its time. The second example is in the Middle Ages. 13 was the normal age of marriage for a Jewish woman. Okay, in this case, we're looking at a particular minority culture in a different period of time. Now we're in the Middle Ages, and we're not looking at Western European culture. We're looking at Jewish culture. In this case, too, we have a woman who is, or female who's been married relatively young. And then we have the Roman Empire, which was, you know, lasted many centuries and covered a fairly large portion of the globe. It was a very large empire, not just Rome itself, but the empire itself, spread out to various regions. And many Roman women were married at age 13 or younger. Now, once again, it's very hard to generalize about all women in the past, but I think these are three fairly representative examples. Could it be more representative? Sure. You might want to have women from, let's say, from Asian culture represented. China, the Chinese Empire, was obviously extremely large and very populous. So an example from Imperial China might have been a good example, perhaps an example from Latin America. It can be very hard to try and cover all the bases in just three examples. You can try to be as representative as possible, but keep in mind, it can be very hard, if not altogether impossible, to try and be completely representative. And that's simply because when you are dealing with a very large set of data, the generalization will have to be general. Okay. So yeah, women in Roman times married young, therefore women married very young in the past. That by itself wouldn't be enough, although it could be an illustration. Remember, you want to consider women from other times, other places. It's worth noting that even in modern times, people tend to generalize a lot. People will generalize about people at their school. People might generalize about people in their city or in their country or other parts of the world. And we often do this with very, very little data. I'll just give you a very brief example. Where I am from, there is a rivalry between two cities, Vancouver and Toronto. And people from Toronto like to say that people in Vancouver are lazy. We don't work very hard, and we probably consume too much cannabis, and yeah, we're not viewed as very diligent. However, people in Vancouver will often make broad, sweeping statements about many of the people in Toronto and say that they are too busy, too career focused, and unfriendly. Once again, these are two statements which are often made with very little data, but you can probably think in your own life of certain opinions that you have of different groups of people or places, and we do often generalize with very little real information. If you want to know what foreigners think of your country, for example, you could, this is for the Korean students, you could walk around the streets of Seoul and find different foreign tourists and ask them what they think of South Korea. But that probably wouldn't be very representative of what foreigners in general think about this country, because people that have come to Korea obviously already have some knowledge or some interest in the country and are therefore very specific group of people and may not be representative of what the broader international opinion might be. Okay. This is why it's important to use more than one example. Here's the case of solar power. If you say solar power is widely used, therefore renewable energy is widely used, you cannot extrapolate from the single example of solar power that renewable energy is widely used. You would need to have three different examples to try and prove your point. Solar power is widely used. Hydroelectric power has long been widely used, and even windmills are becoming common again. Therefore, renewable energy is widely used. In this case, the generalization that renewable energy is widely used has three different examples: solar power, hydroelectric power, and windmills. these three are fairly representative. Are there other forms of renewable energy? Yes. It's impossible to list all of them in a simple generalization. But if you're going to have three examples, try and make them as varied as possible. Remember, generalizations about large sets require relevant and representative samples. And trying to decide what is the best kind of representative example is sometimes the biggest challenge. Now, sometimes when people have a sample of examples, they might be biased, in which case they're not representative. Let's use this example. University students strongly dislike online classes. Okay, there's my generalization. University students strongly dislike online classes. And then I go and maybe I take a poll, I get people to answer a survey. Do you like online classes? Do you dislike online classes? And all of or the majority of the students that I talk to say that they strongly dislike online classes. Well, in that case, let's take a look at where these students are. If I only asked Sogong University students, then it's probably a better idea to make a more specific generalization. Sogong students strongly dislike online classes, rather than saying all university students or most university students dislike online classes. If I could only ask students from China, Korea, and Japan whether they disliked online university students, let's say I talked to a few thousand people in Korea, a few thousand people in China, a few thousand people in Japan. In that case, it might be better for me to focus my generalization on Asian university students. So depending on how biased your sample is or how non-representative it might be, the better thing might be to make your generalization focused on the sample that you do have. Okay, we looked at this example in class. Weaknesses, yeah, if Susan works at the store and the other workers in this store, many of them have graduated from prestigious universities and they can't find a better job. Maybe this means that young graduates these days cannot find jobs that pay very well. Or it might be a better idea to get more representative examples. We might want to try and broaden the scope of this and say, let's take a look at random graduates from a wide range of universities from around the country, and maybe look at students that graduated with different majors, rather than just look at employees of a single store. Okay, and that was looking at examples. Now I'm going to bring up background rates. Let's quickly review background rates before we go on. Okay, as I also mentioned in class, if you hear that somebody got a bullseye, that might mean that they are very good at archery, or it might mean that they are actually very poor and inexperienced at archery. We can't tell just from knowing that they shot a bullseye unless we know the background rates. If you don't know how many times it took the person to get a background, or sorry, if you don't know how many times it took the person to actually shoot a bullseye or to get a hole-in-one on a golf course, you can't tell whether the person is very good at archery or golf. The background rate is what tells us how reliable that claim is. Another example that I talked about in class is horoscopes. If you read your horoscope and it says that, I don't know, something bad is going to happen to you that day, and you go outside, you fall down and you break your leg, you might say, wow, horoscopes are very reliable. My horoscope said that something bad was going to happen, and then I broke my leg that day. And that might be true, but you have to take the background rates into consideration. How many predictions, how many predictions that came up in horoscopes actually come true? And the research shows that the likelihood of a prediction in a horoscope coming true is extremely low. Even though a horoscope's prediction may come true, it does not mean that horoscopes are a reliable way to predict the future. It simply means that once in however many thousand or million times, one of the predictions might actually reflect reality. The old expression that even a broken clock is right twice a day might be applicable in this case. Yeah, a prediction might not be reliable. It might just be lucky. It might be an exception to the rule. And if you think about certain phenomenon that we read about in the news, whether it's a terrorist attack or a shark attack or a plane crash, sometimes people get the sense that these sorts of dangers are much more common than they are, because when they do occur, they are often the focus of a lot of media attention. And as a result, people might think that there's a greater chance of dying in one of these events than there actually is. In reality, a lot of fatalities and injuries occur doing much more mundane everyday things like driving a car to work, for example. Okay, yeah, we talked about Tanya. I thought this was a really great example. Okay, so she has a great poker face. She's a very talented card player. Is she more likely to be a high school teacher, or is she more likely to be a professional poker player? Well, look at the background rates. There are a lot more high school teachers out there than there are professional poker players. And if all you know is that she's a talented card player and that she has a very good poker face, that's not enough for us to assume that she's a professional poker player. The likelihood, the greatest likelihood, is that she's just a high school teacher. Okay. If you take a look here, we looked at these examples of the campus police. If somebody is doing voodoo or hoodoo rituals in order to improve their financial situation, you would need to think, well, how many people, for example, do these hoodoo rituals and then, have an increased or have improved financial situations? This is the sort of situation where people will often say, if you do X, then there will be some kind of benefit. Your situation will improve. And it might be doing a ritual. It might involve prayer. It might be some sort of lucky charm. But once again, unless you look at the background rates, it's very hard to determine whether or not this is a reliable form or whether the person was just lucky. Just because somebody did X and therefore their situation improved doesn't mean that X caused that. Here's another great one to look at. Exactly 0 children died from measles in the United States between 2004 and 2015. But in the same period, 106 infants died after exhibiting reactions to measles vaccines. Obviously, the real danger here is not measles, it is the measles vaccine. Now, if somebody wanted to argue that vaccines are more dangerous than not, and in this case, I'm using the example of the measles vaccine. I'm not talking about COVID in this case. If you want to argue that the vaccine is more dangerous than the disease, you would need to know the background rates. For example, how many children received a vaccine and how many children died from the disease. Sorry, how many children had the vaccine and how many children died as a result of that vaccine. If 20 million children received the measles vaccine and 106 infants died after receiving the vaccine, you could calculate how dangerous that vaccine is. It says exactly 0 children died from measles in the United States between 2004 and 2015. Well, take a look at the background rates. How many children were vaccinated in the United States between 2004 and 2015? Did the vaccine offer any protection for those children? Although it says that 0 children died, what about other health consequences for children, particularly children who did not receive the vaccine? These are all background rates that are very important if you want to see if a particular vaccine is more dangerous than not receiving the vaccine. Simply saying, look, 0 children died from this particular disease, but a certain number of children died after receiving the vaccine. Therefore, the vaccine is more dangerous. That doesn't hold water. Oh, when I say doesn't hold water, that means is not a reliable argument. Okay, next we're going to go on to statistics. So I think I'm going to have to go into my third one here. Moving out. Stats. All right. Oh. And let's bring that up. Okay, there we are. Perfect. Okay, so statistics, or as I mentioned before, lies, damned lies, and statistics, as they're often referred to. Statistics often seem very authoritative because they're hard numbers. 66% of people, or this school wastes 584,000 paper cups a year. When we hear numbers, it's very easy to believe that they're trustworthy and that they are arguing a case effectively. And they may be arguing a case. They may be very reliable, but not always. Statistics do require a critical eye because statistics can mislead. And we'll take a look at how statistics can mislead people. If you say car thefts doubled, for example, that doesn't mean very much if you're talking about doubling from 1 car theft to 2. If you do a poll and you say, 90% of people agree with the president's policy, well, how many people did you ask? Did you only ask 100 and therefore 90 people agreed? Where were these people polled? Were they a representative sample or not? If you go to an area where, for example, the president is very popular and you ask people, do you approve of his policy? You might get a very high percentage of people that say, yes, they do support it. However, that statistic doesn't necessarily mean that the population in general supports it, because it might not be a representative sample. So statistics too need a critical eye. Loaded questions can also make a difference. Sometimes people that are conducting a poll or doing a survey will use loaded language in order to make a person more or less likely to say yes or no. I cannot say for sure, but when I think back to the polling in 2016, this was before Donald Trump was elected president, most polls, including a lot of telephone polls, suggested that Hillary Clinton would win the election by a very large number of votes, that she would be elected president without very much difficulty at all. Most of the estimates were between 70 and 98% chance. I do wonder whether possibly some of the wording in the polling may have convinced some people to answer a question that no, they wouldn't vote for Trump. And then on the day of the election, in the privacy of the voting booth, they made their real choice. But we'll never know. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of statistics here and see why they may be misleading. We looked at this one in class. The burglary occurs every 15 seconds. Up to 80% of forced entries occur through a front door or window. It's very suspicious that this advertisement says up to 80%. Up to 80% does not actually mean up to 80%. Could be anywhere from 5% to 80. We don't know the minimum number. Also, if 80% of forced entries occur through the front door or the window, which percent occur through the front door, which percent occur through the window? If you don't know, it's very difficult to ascertain the value of that statistic. Especially later on when the advertisement says this product will help burglars from breaking through your front door. Well, that will help possibly help prevent burglars from breaking through your front door. But if only a small percentage of forced entries occur through the front door, or if a large number of burglaries occur without forced entry, then the brace might not actually do very much at all. So we need to know what up to 80% means, how many burglaries actually involve forced entry, and how many were through a window, not a door. This last example here, which I gave you in class, talks about how the average person lies to 34% of the people that they encounter during the week. This is a very good case of a premise that does not actually say what we think it says. It's when I listen to students talk about this premise during the typical week, the average person lies to 34% of the people. Many people misunderstood and thought it was somehow related to the number of times that they lie. For example, they lie 34% of the time. But this premise has nothing to do with the number of times that a person spoke and the percentage of lies within that total number. It just has to do with lying to a particular percentage of people. If you meet 100 people in a week and you say 100 things to each person, but you only lie one time to 34% of them, that's actually a very, very small number of lies out of the total number of times you spoke, in which case the conclusion, you cannot believe much of anything that anyone says, is not supported by the premise. Okay. Also, yeah, what counts as a lie? There are many lies that people will often tell. For example, how are you? I'm fine, thank you, and you. And actually, they're not fine. Does that count as a lie? And if it does count as a lie, how would that actually reflect on not being able to trust what people say? By the way, it's worth noting here that the The likelihood of a person lying when they're asked, "How are you?" varies from culture to culture. In Western, I'll say quote unquote Western culture, it's very common to lie when somebody says, "How are you?" People often don't expect you to even give an honest answer. It's just a way of saying hello. So if someone says, "Hi, how are you?" and you say, "Oh, I've had a horrible day. My boss was bitching at me, and my car got a flat tire," and you start talking about all the things that are bothering you, actually the person will probably feel uncomfortable and wish that they hadn't asked you because they were not actually looking for an honest answer. It was just a greeting. And apparently, in some other cultures, it is less likely to ask, "How are you?" And it's also less likely to to lie if you are asked. Interesting stuff. Okay. And finally, counterexamples. If you are going to make a generalization about something, uh, remember, no generalization is going to be 100% accurate, right? I think we've established that. So if you are going to do a presentation and talk about a generalization, let's go back to the first one. Women these days get married at much older ages than they did in the past. It's a good idea to point out that, yes, this is a generalization, and it's not completely true across the board. And you could give specific counterexamples to show that you are aware that this is a generalization and not a stereotype. You're not talking about everyone. And this can actually help you refine your generalization if necessary. You might remember from the list of countries around the world on Wikipedia that we looked at a few classes ago. There are a number of countries right now in the world where women still get married as a young teenager or their late teens or even their early 20s. So if you want to generalize about women getting married at older ages, it might be better to be either region specific or generation specific. So there you go. All right. And I believe it is now time to go to, oh, here's a great counter. We didn't have time to do this one in class. All right, we don't have time to do this one in our next class, but just something to think about over the Easter weekend when you watch this lecture. If you wanted to take a look at one of these different generalizations, like K-pop stars are young and attractive, Mexican food is very spicy, the weather in Southeast Asia is really hot, people live healthier lives now than 100 years ago, or most people do not pay by cash anymore. While each of these statements functions quite well as a generalization, I mean, a lot of K-pop stars are quite young and attractive. A lot of Mexican food is quite spicy. If you go to Southeast Asia, the weather in most of the areas, most of the time, is quite hot, etc. These are not always true. I'm sure there's at least one K-pop star out there that must be a little bit older and possibly not so attractive. There might be some Mexican foods that are actually kind of bland, and some parts of Southeast Asia, thinking parts of Northwest Vietnam, for example, late in the evening, it can get quite chilly, almost down to 0 in some of those mountainous areas. Quite chilly, got to bring a coat. So yeah, generalizations, they're general. Okay, so I think we're done that now. And let's go on to chapter 3. Chapter 3, which I asked you to read for homework, is arguments by analogy. So let's take a quick look at that. And we will be looking at arguments arguments using analogy in our next class. So here we go. This is background information for you. A lot of the examples here are straight from the book. Okay, so my mama always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. This is an analogy. An analogy is a comparison of two things. People will often say that something is like something else, and they make these comparisons in order to make a point or show that two things are similar in a couple of ways. Therefore, they are probably similar in another way. Or maybe they're using an analogy to try and get to a point. It's part of an argument leading to a conclusion. In this case, when Forrest Gump said, "My mama always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." Okay, this is comparing life to a box of chocolates. When you open a box of chocolates, you don't know what each chocolate contains. One chocolate may have a cherry inside, another one might have caramel, another one might have an almond. You don't know exactly what you're going to get. There is a degree of unpredictability. And likewise in life, you don't always know what is going to happen. The future is not set. There is a degree of unpredictability. Okay, so therefore, try and enjoy each chocolate for what it has, and there you go. So what's an analogy? Saying that something is like something else, you have to make a point or demonstrate a principle. Arguing from one specific example to another to draw a conclusion. Like because two examples are similar in these specific ways, they're also alike in one more way. Or because of certain similarities between A and B, something else is going to happen. I'll just give you one example of an analogy that just came into my head now. When I learned how to drive, and my friend said, don't worry. Learning how to drive is like learning how to ride a bike. Now, learning how to drive and learning how to ride a bike, these are two experiences that share certain similarities. Of course, they are not exactly alike. When you make an analogy comparing A and B, you're not trying to say that the two things are exactly alike. What you are trying to do is point out that there are certain relevant similarities. So, for example, when you learn how to ride a bike, at first it's a little scary, but once you learn the basics, you can become very comfortable riding a bike within a short period of time. Likewise, it might be very scary at first when you first start learning how to drive, but after you've taken a few lessons, your confidence will quickly build and you will feel comfortable driving on the road. Okay. The first example that is mentioned in the textbook is about a woman called Valentina Tereshkova. And she said, if women can be railroad workers in Russia, why can't they fly in space? I think she was the first female astronaut to fly in space. And when she said that, if women can be railroad workers in Russia, why can't they fly in space? What she was trying to say was, well, women in Russia at the time were railroad workers, and they were very good at being railroad workers. Being a railroad worker, it shares many similarities to being an astronaut. So if a Russian woman can be a great railroad worker, then she can also be a great astronaut. What does it say here? Yeah, women are as capable as men in railroad work, which is very difficult physically and technically, and they're as dedicated to their country as men. Therefore, women should also make fine astronauts. So we've got two premises here. Number one, women are capable railroad workers in Russia. Number two, being a railroad worker is like being an astronaut. And number three, therefore, women can be capable astronauts as well. That's the conclusion there, number 3. Now, by the way, this is obviously from many years ago when there were probably more similarities between railroad work and being an astronaut than there are now. Obviously, the degree of technical expertise and scientific knowledge that is needed to be an astronaut in the 21st century is much greater than it was in the mid-20th century. Okay, now, if you want to make an analogy, the important thing is that your premises must actually be true. In this case, when she said, if I go back there, yeah, women are capable railroad workers in Russia. It's important that this premise is actually true. If women in Soviet Russia back in the 50s or 60s actually had not proven themselves to be very good in railroad work, then this premise wouldn't work because it wouldn't be factual. If you want to use a fact-based premise in your analogy, that has to be true. So let's suppose women have not been very capable railroad workers in Russia at that time. In that case, that would destroy the argument. If women have been very capable railroad workers, then the premise holds the argument. Yeah, always make sure that you start from reliable premises. It's got to be true. A premise based on analogy says A is like B, from which the argument draws a conclusion. Yeah, in this case, the comparison between railroad work and being an astronaut, obviously these two are not exactly the same, but Valentina's argument is that they are relevantly similar. Maybe both jobs require a great deal of physical stamina, a certain level of technical skill, and maybe something else. Okay, here is an example from a Native American activist. When he took a plane to Italy, this is a number of years ago, at a press conference after getting off the plane, he made a very controversial statement. He said, "I am taking possession of Italy by right of discovery in the same way that Christopher Columbus did in America." Okay, this goes back to, the old school books that used to say Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. He discovered America, which I don't actually think he did. I proclaim this day the day of the discovery of Italy. Yeah, what right did Columbus have to discover America when people had been living there for thousands of years? The same right I now have to come to Italy and proclaim the discovery of your country. I think he's being a bit of a provocateur in this case. I don't think he was actually arguing that he is going to physically take possession of the nation state of Italy, but he is trying to make a point here. And that point is that Christopher Columbus, according to this argument, traveled to a place far away from his home where there were people already living there, but he claimed the land of America as his by the right of discovery. I have come here. I am the first person to discover it, therefore it's mine. And he says, well, now I've come to Italy, and using that same logic, I am now going to claim Italy. You know, the Italians have been living here for thousands of years, but that doesn't matter because natives had been living in the Americas for thousands of years, but Christopher Columbus used the logic that he was claiming it by the right of discovery. So there's a comparison here between Christopher Columbus and Fortunate Eagle, Adam Norwell, going to the United States or going to Italy. Let's take a look at how similar these two examples of logic are. Keep in mind, no one is trying to argue that they are exactly the same. The point here, are they relevantly similar. Okay, so both Fortunate Eagle and Columbus claimed to discover a country that had been inhabited for many centuries. Okay, Christopher Columbus, according to the story, went to the United States, or went to the landmass of North America, and it had been inhabited already for a long time by native people. And Fortunate Eagle, I'll use his native name, went to Italy and also found a land that was inhabited, had been inhabited for a long time. Therefore, he has as much right to discovery as Columbus did. Now, he's kind of pushing a case here that he knows he's wrong. Like he's saying, you know, actually, of course, I have no real claim to Italy, but by the same token, Columbus didn't have a right to the America with his argument by saying it was his by the right of discovery. If it's not okay for Fortunate Eagle to go to America, to go to Italy and say that the country is his by right of discovery, then it wasn't right for Columbus to go to the Americas and say the same thing. Now, once again, these two ideas are not exactly the same. There are significant differences. 20th century Italy is not like 15th century America. Taking a plane to Italy, obviously, he did not discover Italy. He was not even the first native to go there. People from all over the world have been visiting Italy for a very long time. So he was not discovering it, quote unquote, in the same way that Christopher Columbus claimed to have discovered the Americas. But he is making a point, and that it's senseless to claim a country by right of discovery if it's already inhabited. How the discoverer got there, whether it's known by other people, those are not relevant differences in this argument. Okay, and therefore it would have been better if Christopher Columbus had tried to establish diplomatic relations with native peoples rather than claiming the land as his own. Okay. All right, so one of the activities that we're going to do next Tuesday is I would like you to get together with a few partners and create an analogy of your own. So, for example, maybe an analogy about school, going to going to school is like something, or falling in love is like something else, or chasing a dream is like something else. And then I would like you and your partners to explain in what ways is your comparison relevantly similar. And if they are relevantly similar, then is there a final point that you're trying to make? Like, for example, the first female Russian astronaut said that, if I go back here, I don't want to misquote her. Yeah, if women can be railroad workers in Russia, why can't they fly in space? Here she's saying that women can be capable of railroad workers. Therefore, okay, railroad work and astronaut work is similar in a variety of different ways. Therefore, women should also be able to be astronauts, and women can be capable astronauts as well. So the similarities actually have a point. She's saying that being a railroad worker and being an astronaut, these two things have relevant similarities. So if women are able to do one, they should be able to do the other. Okay. So what's another one here? Like I've got one more example here. Adopting a dog and having a child. Okay, adopting a dog is like having a child, and that they both require taking responsibility for another living being. Okay, now everyone's going to understand that adopting a dog and having a child are not exactly the same. But for this analogy, we have to see if there are relevant similarities. And are those relevant similarities strong enough to make this analogy work? Adopting a dog is like having a child. Both require taking responsibility for another living being. Also, they can both turn your house into a big mess. On the other hand, having a child involves a lot more responsibility, creates a much longer commitment, and eventually leads to there being another adult human being in the world. Now, something to think about. And I'll ask everybody this as maybe the first question when we get back together in class on Tuesday. Do you think this is a good analogy? Do you think that if someone says, I'm going to adopt a dog, and if someone says, oh, you know what, if you're going to adopt a dog, you better be ready. It's like having a child. In that case, the person is saying, listen, adopting a dog is not an easy thing. It can be difficult in many ways, just like raising a child can be. Is that a strong analogy? Are the similarities relevant enough to overcome the differences? Because there are some similarities between raising a dog and having a child, and there are also some differences. Do you think the differences are stronger, or do you think that the similarities are relevant enough? Okay, and here are a few examples I might ask you to whip up a comparison for, or a list of relevant similarities and differences. I might think of some other ones too. Yeah, compare like being a student and having a job. Is being a student relevantly similar enough to compare it to having a job? How about your brain and a computer? Or first-degree murder and euthanasia? Euthanasia, obviously, this is also known as mercy killing, when a terminally ill person chooses to end their own life. Is it a good analogy if someone says, if a doctor helps a patient end their life, a terminally ill patient helps them end their life, that's just like murder. Okay, is that a good analogy or not? In what ways is that comparison relevantly similar, and in which ways is it different? Compare cooking a meal and living a life, planet Earth and a living organism. Yeah, these are all things that we'll take a look at, plus more, at the beginning of our next class. Got an example here and a couple of other ones. Yeah, some of these actually I think I will go over in class, but I've given you enough here, and I think that should be enough. So hopefully, let me just turn off the. There you go. Hopefully you enjoyed my review of Unit 2, taking a look at making generalizations, what different types of examples you need to use, and also Unit 3, our introduction to arguments using analogy. If there are any contents of this lecture that you feel are unclear or you don't understand, please either ask me a question in class or post it in Cacao Work, which is where we have our chat room. I hope everyone has a great Easter weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all back in class on Tuesday. Thank you very much, and I'll see you then.